Produced by Podcast Architects.
Welcome back to Hit the Gas. I'm your host, Jake Gose. I'm here with my good friend and coworker, Joaquin. How are you doing, Joaquin?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
That's great, man. Yeah, we're at the TASB conference, the Path Forward, one of our internal shows. We've shot a bunch of content here. We've walked around, gotten some pretty decent interviews with different businesses. What are you excited about here today?
I mean, it's not the usual Friday for a college student, so it's definitely a blessing to be here. I mean, just getting to know people and really provide value to them is what we're doing here. So.
Absolutely, man. So I've kind of gone through each employee of PA. I've interviewed Ben a bunch of times, and I kind of want to get your story on how you came to either meet Ben or just end up at Podcast Architects. So where did it all begin?
Yeah, so that's actually a pretty long story. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible, but also as entertaining as possible. So I started out, as a senior in high school, I was weighing where I wanted to go to school. And I came to Mays. I came to Mays Business School here at A&M. And I toured the school, and there was a big sign for a podcast. It was called the Mays Mastercast. It was a podcast for the MBA program at Mays Business School. And it was just basically like a rundown of former alumni and things like that. And so the person that was giving me the tour said, hey, if you do come here, you should check out the podcast. To which I said, sure. I ended up committing to A&M. I was going to be a Mays business student. And so during the summer, before my freshman year of college, I would listen to a show every single day. And so every single day, whether I was playing basketball, walking the dogs, driving to work, I was listening to a new show. And I just really liked it. I really liked being so thrown into the business side. And the host of that podcast was Ben Wiggins.
Okay.
And then there was also a co-host named Shannon Deere, who's now the undergraduate dean at Mays Business School.
Wow.
And since she was the undergraduate dean, during my summer program, which is kind of when you come, sign up for classes at A&M, you get a tour, Shannon Deere was giving a speech. And to me, it's just Shannon Deere, to Mays business students and stuff. But to me, this was the co-host of the podcast that I've been listening to for a whole month.
Right.
So to me, it was how some people are so passionate about Joe Rogan and a bunch of popular podcasters. Yeah. That's how big of a deal
so crazy.
Shannon Deere and Ben Wiggins were to me.
Wow.
And so Shannon Deere is talking, and so I'm like, oh my God, that's Shannon Deere. I have to go talk to her. Mm-hmm. I go talk to her after her presentation, and she's flattered. She's like, oh, I'm glad you're a fan, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, okay, now I just need to find Ben Wiggins.
Right.
And then so a few weeks go by, and Ben Wiggins is leading kind of like a tech conference talk of former Aggies who work in tech companies and stuff. And I'm sitting in the back of this auditorium, and it's packed. And as soon as I hear his voice, I'm like, oh my God, that's literally Ben Wiggins. After watching 200 episodes over the summer, I could tell.
Yeah.
And but I really wanted to go up to him then, but there were a lot of people in the whole auditorium, and I was sitting near the back, and people actually needed to talk about what the conference was actually for.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'll give my time. I'll go visit him some other time. Fast forward a whole semester, and I'm still listening to the show here and there, and I have a retreat for a peer mentorship program that I'm going to be doing and that I'm going to be training for. And before we go on this retreat, one of the questions they ask is, what's something you want to do before you graduate? And then I looked at that piece of paper and I said, what is something I want to do before graduate? And then I said, I want to do something different. I want to do something that nobody really gets to do.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to be on the Mays Mastercast.
Okay.
And I write that down. This was on a Monday. And then fast forward to Wednesday, I was in an organization called PrEP, which is a professionalism organization at A&M for freshmen.
Sure.
It's called The Flow. And we have guest speakers that come in every single Wednesday, and they talk to us. And so I'm sitting near the front of the class or whatever, and I see a guy who's super tall, super buff, walk up to the podium. Sounds basically to start speaking.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and no. Side note, everyone in Podcast Architects is super ripped except for me. Everybody is everybody could definitely deadlift and bench press twice their weight and stuff. But anyways, And so I'm sitting in the front, and then this guy walks up, and he looks like a college student, kind of low key, and I was also not wearing my glasses.
Mm-hmm.
So he walks up, and he starts talking, and I noticed right away. I recognized the voice, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Ben Wiggins.
Nice.
Which, like, obviously now he's my
Right,
boss, but
right.
then I was like, oh my God, like that's the guy like
Yeah.
of my favorite podcast, like the
Mhm.
host. And so I'm like mesmerized the whole time. And at the
Yeah.
end, he asks like, there's like a Q&A, and I shoot my hand up like I'm the first one.
Mhm.
And for the Maze Mastercast, the icebreaker used to always be like, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Mhm.
So I raise my hand, like I shoot it up, and he's like, yeah, what's up? And I was like, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Mhm.
And then the whole like place, like everybody starts laughing and
Nice.
stuff, but like they don't know that that's the icebreaker that
Right,
he uses
right.
for his episodes. And then so he's like, and so but he recognizes that I do
Yeah.
and stuff. And I at the end of that, I asked like 3 or 4 questions maybe. I've never asked so many questions to one of those meetings before. And after, I go up to him and I'm like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I'm such a fan of the show.
Yeah.
Like, I've actually watched it so many episodes. And he's flattered, and he looks at me and he goes, how would you like to be on the podcast?
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. Because keep in mind, like on Monday, I had just written that I would like to be on the podcast
Right.
one day.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking like maybe as a junior, like most likely as a senior, like if
Yeah.
I do something cool enough. So I was not expecting this on like a 2-day turnaround.
Yeah.
So I end up going on.
2-day turnaround for God. Thank you.
Yeah, I told this story to one of my friends, and he was like, dude, you need to start writing more things down ASAP. And so, anyways, I was super excited, super pumped, and I was also like, what the heck am I gonna talk about? Like,
Yeah.
I'm a freshman, and ended up being that my roommate was also connected to Ben, and so he invited him on the podcast too.
Wow.
So both of us actually ended up being on the podcast at the same time in the same episode. And
That's
for
sick.
me, it was like a full circle moment and like a welcome to A&M type of moment. And,
Yeah.
and it was cool. Like it was a good experience. And
Yeah.
Ben talked to me and my roommate after the show, and it was just a good connection.
Where can people watch that podcast if they want to go back and see it?
So it's called Life Happens For You.
Okay.
That's the title of the podcast, I'm pretty sure. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, through the Maze Mastercast.
Gotcha. Can we can put a link to that in the
Yeah, for
description.
sure, absolutely.
Great.
Probably be a link down below.
Okay.
And so it was a good show. It was a good episode. It was more than 30 minutes long, so it definitely
Great.
like ran well.
Wow.
And I mean, now I'm working for Podcast Architects, right? So
Yeah.
like I know about all these like podcasting terms and things
Mhm.
like that. But anyways, I was not planning on working for
Yeah.
the podcast side of things. And
Yeah.
I mean, Maze Mastercast is not a Podcast Architects show.
Mhm.
So after that, that was the spring of my freshman year, and I was looking for an internship during the summer. And so I was applying pretty hardcore to some internships in San Antonio, my hometown, and I was really into HEB.
Okay.
I really wanted to intern at HEB that summer, and they rejected me
Wow.
for a couple of internships because I was a freshman.
Wow.
And so,
Sucks.
but I had a few that I was still, there were 2 more HEB internships that I was like still pending on.
Mhm.
And so I was talking to Ben. Really wanted me to come on the team and just help out and just be a part of the Podcast Architects
Yeah.
like work culture. And I was really interested, but this was my freshman year, and I was like financing my own college and things like that. So
Wow.
I had a lot of like money pressure to get a job that would pay me well and stuff. And so I initially I was hesitant, and then I told Ben about my situation, and that's something I like love and respect a lot about the culture here at Podcast Architects, and Ben specifically, like I'm very grateful for, because he leads by example, and it's really easy to be vulnerable with him because he's a
Mhm.
really understanding person.
I agree.
So I just told him about my situation, because in my mind I was being transparent about like, my situation and like why I really couldn't work with them or with here, because
Yeah.
I just had some other needs and priorities that I needed to like get straight.
Sure.
And also there was also the distance factor being in San Antonio versus College Station.
Yeah.
And so Ben tells me, let me talk to Cullen. Let me talk to, the next, like one of the other execs. And
Mhm.
basically he comes back to me a few days later, maybe like 1 or 2 days, and he tells me like, hey, like whatever HEB was going to give you, like we can match it, and you can work remote from home.
Wow.
And I was so grateful. Like I think I said yes on the spot because I felt so honored that he was willing to help me out,
Yeah.
first of all, and then just like to take a chance on me,
Yeah.
especially after being turned down by HEB, like, and some other companies in San Antonio. Like I was just really motivated to like put in the work,
Yeah.
like and it was cool. It was like podcasting. It was something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And then so I think that was literally May, like right before I went back to San Antonio. And right then I heard back from one of the companies, and I think I one of the other companies that I applied for, and then one of the internships at HEB I got. And then I remember turning them down because like I took it personally that they turned me down so many times before, and I was also there was no reason for me to go somewhere when some other place like opened their arms so
Right.
willingly.
Right.
And so I started working for Podcast Architects since that summer, and I've been at Podcast Architects, throughout the school year ever
Wow.
since. So,
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. Like, that's a very inspiring story. Like, I didn't know that about you. That's pretty sweet. I'm glad we, not even just to record the podcast, but I'm glad that I know that. That's pretty sweet. Good deal, man. Well, so try to explain like what you do exactly at PA. I'm sure you have lots of different jobs, just like I do and everyone else. But so, what's your role within the company?
So my role, I started out as what we had then was called the project manager. So it's
Okay.
just managing shows, talking to clients,
Sure.
things like that. And then as creative lead from day one,
Mm-hmm.
which is honestly the bulk of what we do. I call it
Yep.
the bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
Just like content staging episodes, pulling quotes,
Yep.
writing descriptions.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what we do here. And I started out then. I still do it now.
Yeah.
But I also did some recruiting in the middle. I felt like it
Nice.
was a good fit for me. I recruited some of our other members and our past members, like Alexia,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Corbin, who's one of our current members.
Yeah.
I recruited him in from a school connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been honestly my favorite part, or my favorite role at Podcast Architects, just being
Yeah.
able to connect people, really cool people with this really cool company who can bring a lot of value. And it's just there's a lot of opportunity for tangible experience.
Fantastic.
We're still relatively small, and there's a lot of upside into that. There's a lot of responsibility, and there's also this level of opportunity that you wouldn't get at a bigger company.
Yeah.
And so that's huge, and especially with someone like Corbin, being able to, bring him onto the team and see how much like he's been able to benefit and just like fit into this team seamlessly, and how much Podcast Architects like loves to have Corbin. Like it's just that's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Corbin just got married, actually.
Yeah, and Corbin. Yeah, so he
Yeah.
clearly has his life figured out, which like I'm very happy for him.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, he's just a great guy, and like
Yeah.
the people here, people make or break organizations, and Podcast Architects takes having like really nice and genuine people very seriously.
Absolutely, man. That's amazing. Something that I like to ask the podcast architects members that we have on to the show is where would you like to see PA within the next couple of years? Like, do you want to be international? Do you want there's been a few different examples, but where would you personally like to see the company?
I think I would love to see Podcast Architects be a juggernaut in the podcasting space.
Sure.
Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity. It seems like, your favorite athletes, your favorite musicians, like even like random people like are hopping on just like podcasts where they just talk about life and things like that. Like I think it's such a growing space, and like we are one of the first people to really jump on it and start monetizing it.
Yeah.
And I think in a state where there's a lot of economic opportunity,
Yeah.
there's obviously a lot of like media opportunity as well, because there's not a lot of media presence here.
Yeah.
And so I think in terms of a number, I think shooting for high numbers with like a lot of employees and a lot of cool shows would be where I would see Podcast Architects, and hopefully in the near future, honestly.
Yeah.
Just to be able to really be part of the change that is inevitable, right? Like podcasting is one of those industries that is becoming inevitable. Like people, like companies, like they need media content. They need to be in touch with their consumers in some form of media. And podcasting is one of the most relatable forms of media, right? So I think Podcast Architects has a lot of leverage in the future in terms of, the value that it can bring on to people. Even from A to Z, all types of businesses. If you have a podcast, you are doing something that your competitor is likely not.
Yeah.
And that's always leverage.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity that way. I think, in terms of even for school districts, those are some of our biggest clients. Like getting bonds. Those are funding, like being in touch with their communities. Those are things that are very relevant to directors and superintendents. And those are some of the people that we help out the most here at Parks Architects.
Sure.
So we're already doing that. We're already doing a lot of change there, and I would love to see that expanding into other sectors, into other industries.
Absolutely.
So it's more of a question of when and how, not if.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, man, that's fantastic. I have one last closing question for you, and it's kind of a fun one. Most kids want to be like a cop or an army man whenever they're a little kid. What did you want to be whenever you were a kid? Like, was it anything to do with production or, something more basic?
Yeah, so I always feel like God has a hand in your mind, not being able to lie to yourself. I remember being a little kid and watching like sideline reporters and like sports announcers and like people on TV and being like, oh, like I would love that job. I would love to be that. So I think in a way, like, I'm very grateful to be here because I get to play around with some of the media stuff and just be around being around cameras and production and editing. Like, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of professional interests as well, and I'm very blessed to have the opportunity to chase them. But my dream job would be to somehow be in sports industry, sports business, sports media, or that was as a kid. And then now, like, I would love to, I don't know, one day be like a Jimmy Fallon or a Jimmy Kimmel, like have a Tonight Show. I feel like that would be like such a cool job. You know, you only get one life, like, and like if somebody else can do it, obviously you can, right? Like, obviously you have to meet the demand. You have to meet the demand that it takes to get to one of those places. But like, getting there one day would be one of the best climbs and one of the most rewarding climbs of anyone's life. So,
and that's what we're here. The show is all about motivation and chasing your dreams and really hitting the gas. And that's awesome, man. I love that message. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If you want to have your own podcast, check out our website at podconsulting.co. If you're interested in working for PA, go ahead and fill out the form there. Follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.
Produced by Podcast Architects.